The last thing an HVAC contractor wants, like the nightmare, is one of their clients calling in winter saying, that system, that newfangled system you installed for me, isn't working, I'm cold. And they've, for 30, 40, 50 years, they've installed furnaces that they know work, that can size well, they're reliable. And so what's the motivation for them to try something new? And so I think like for many HVAC contractors.
So if you could, in the most simplest terms, and maybe start with you, Matt, because you're on more of the practical side, explain what are heat pumps, in simple terms, what are they, how do they work, and why are they so efficient?
I like to say a heat pump, an air conditioner is just a crappy heat pump, right? It's a heat pump that's missing a piece. The skill set to install a heat pump is the same as the skill set to install an air conditioner, whether it's central or ductless. And it's all the same certifications and the same kinds of workers do it. So that's just to say, a heat pump shouldn't be regarded as like some new and fancy thing. There are 20 million heat pumps installed today in the US. 56% of them are in the South. So it's not a red state, blue state thing. It's not a new technology. Yeah. It's something that's already out there in the marketplace. Many of the companies that make them are at scale already. And contractors, at least theoretically, already know how to install them. Briefly, how they work. A heat pump moves heat. It doesn't generate it. So if you have a furnace, it combusts some fuel, oil or gas or propane, and that fuel heats a piece of metal called a heat exchanger, and a fan blows air over it, and that's how the heat gets in your house. For heat pumps, there's a loop, like a copper pipe between the inside and outside. There's a coil. It like kind of curls up into a coil inside. It curls up into a coil outside. And in between the two coils is a compressor. And so, it runs on like these two laws of physics, which is that gases are hotter under pressure and heat moves from hot to cold. That refrigerant, when it's outside, is minus 40 degrees. So even if it's minus 20 outside, there's still a little bit of heat. Goes into the coil, gets pumped through the compressor. Compressor puts it at high pressure, so it's very hot. Goes inside, air blows over the inside coil, deposits the heat in the house, comes back outside, gets depressurized again, and that's very cold, and starts the cycle again. So that's how it moves. And that way, it's kind of like it's just using the energy from the pump and the compressor to like harvest heat and just move it inside rather than having to burn something. So while the most efficient gas furnace that's available is about 96% efficient, heat pumps can be, well, I don't know, certainly the ground source ones can be up 500% efficient or more. On a seasonal basis for air source, it's about 275%.
If you want like a one-liner on like what is a heat pump, I'd say it's an air conditioner that works in two directions. The other thing I just thought I'd clarify, we may throw around a lot of numbers, Matt, throughout the 20 million existing heat pumps. Just like if you look at the USCA announcement, the baseline starts at just shy of 5 million up to 20 million. That's for the 25 states that are part of it. Those are generally kind of like coastal and northern states. Most heat pumps, as Matt said, are actually in the South and the Southeast. It's kind of ironic with some of the culture discussions about this. Most heat pumps are in like, red tilting states. So that's why those numbers are a little different.
So if I've heard any criticism of heat pumps at all, it's that their efficiency, or rather their like efficacy, kind of drops in more extreme weather. Is that true? Is that something that people are sort of misinterpreting the facts there, or is that a reality? And if so, what's the workaround to that?
So it is true. The efficacy does drop as the temperatures get colder. It's harder to pull heat out of the air. Most heat pumps, though, like today's heat pumps, cold weather heat pumps, will draw heat out of the air at like high volume down to freezing temperatures. And so heat pumps like are throughout Maine, which has actually had the most success of any state in terms of the percentage of homes that are now heated with heat pumps. They exist up here in Canada where I live. So they're really within the continental US, there isn't a place where heat pumps can't deliver your heat.
Gotcha.
And the nuance comes with like how much capacity you need to have and some trade-offs as you get in colder and colder climates. and you're getting less out of your heat pumps. Like, how do you size that thing, and where does the paybacks work, and questions like hybrid systems. But they work in every state in the nation.
Some people are out there saying like heat pumps work great. They work great regardless of where you are, which is true. And then some people are out there saying, well, heat pumps don't work below 30 degrees, which is also true. It just depends on the heat pump, right? The real key thing is when you're looking for a heat pump, you need to look for a climate appropriate heat pump.
So moving into the actual numbers and the sort of agreement, or rather commitment that these governors from 25 states, the commitment, so far as I understand it, is that to install 20 million heat pumps, and I'm guessing that's 20 million additional by the end of the decade, which would be more than double the recent count of 18 million heat pumps nationwide. So like that's a pretty significant commitment. My question is pretty simple. How is it going to be accomplished?
Just to get to clarity on the numbers, as Russell pointed out, so most of the heat pumps currently installed are not in the Climate Alliance states. Those states together have about 5 million heat pumps, and we're going to add 20 million, which is going to increase the total in those states by 5 times. But you're correct that it will double the national penetration. From my perspective, if you talk to any of the manufacturers, who are all members of the Building Decarbonization Coalition where I work. And if you look at the sales figures, you'll see that in many of the Climate Alliance states, demand for heat pumps has really skyrocketed in the last, since about 2013.
And do you guys attribute that climb to, is it advocacy or just, happenstance?
The thing that I'd like to highlight here is that heat pumps, while they are a decarbonization tool, are also something that people just want. So I live in New England. Only about 25 or 30% of homes here have air conditioning. So when people buy cold climate heat pumps here, it's because a contractor is saying, oh, you already want to buy air conditioning? Like, here, put in this heat pump. It doesn't cost that much more. You can get your air conditioning, and you can also save money on oil or propane or gas or whatever you use.
Yeah.
So what we've seen is over the past, 8 to 10 years, demand for these systems has really grown significantly in the Northeast by about 500%, a little bit less than 500% since 2013. So you asked, how are the states going to get there? They're going to be harnessing a marketplace that already exists.
Some of the places that there's going to be demand is, you got a bunch of those states require it for new construction. The IRA has kind of moved, I think, low-income households from a place that just wouldn't be, the economics just wouldn't play out, to a place we may see a lot of heat pumps, rebates up to $8,000 for the heat pumps and $6,500 for the panel upgrades and wiring. So that really changes the math. And then you've got places where it's just really cost effective when it comes time to replace your existing heating systems. So if you have delivered fuels, propane or gas, those are really expensive to run. And like the return when you have to replace that system, switching to a heat pump is excellent. That's a big reason I mentioned Maine before. They're doing so well there. You've got air conditioning replacements that Matt mentioned, where the marginal cost of switching to a heat pump is pretty small. And in a lot of the parts of the country where your heating and cooling loads are quite simple, that's like a complete solution. You just, reuse those same ducts. And then there's other places like a house that's already installing solar. There's a lot of synergies, various tax credits, but like it'll increase electrical demand. The solar makes electricity less expensive. The increased panel size makes the solar less expensive. So you kind of get some synergies going on there. And then the other thing I'll say is there's going to be policy will drive a lot of this. So we have the existing policy that we have now, IRA, these mandates, but we'll see a lot more things like that. We'll see more incentive programs, state level, and I think we're going to see states leading by example.
Obviously, information about heat pumps and excitement, I think, has just naturally proliferated over the last few years. I've never heard about heat pumps more than in the last 5 years. Like it just comes up a lot.
Mm-hmm.
But are there any plans to sort of ebb that along?
Yeah, BDC actually has a tool of our own that we run in California. It's called the Switches On. And I think the IRA in the text of the bill has kind of called out the importance of a consumer education resource where people can understand, well, here's how to approach this for your own building. Here's how to find a qualified contractor. Like there are other sources of information for consumers, like realtors and retailers that we're engaging as well on that side of our house. I think there's less of that out there in the States than there could be. A lot of the efficiency programs that have taken on electrification measures have websites that are hard to navigate, and I'm sure Russell's had this experience. Like a lot of people email me asking these types of questions. There's a really big gap there, but we're working to fill it. I mean, at BDC we work with, as I mentioned, manufacturers, wholesalers, big parts of the supply chain to try and kind of smooth the market development that's going to be necessary to be successful here. And we've identified, years ago the need to have more consumer education. So
I would imagine a big part of this initiative is going to be getting kind of contractors on board to talk with their clients about it. Now, obviously, in some states where builders are going to be mandated through new construction, that's not really so much of an issue. But when you think of like remodelers in that state or builders in other states, is there a relationship that you guys have with contractors to get them on board, or do you guys see that naturally occurring? What's the situation there?
This is where the battle will be won or lost. I mean, we're talking about the 161 to 4 family homes in the US. Despite all the press about large institutional owners, like 98% of them are owner occupied. And so they're going to make individual decisions when replacing their heating system or when adding an AC about what to do. And they're going to really, really rely on their contractor. You'll get the odd person that's friends with Matt or I who are like super invested in this stuff and are going to get a heat pump come hell or high water. The vast majority of people will ask their contractor. And if their contractor says, nah, you don't want this thing, it doesn't work, that's going to really dissuade a lot. And then but if the contractor is saying, yeah, this stuff works, there's some tax credits, I've got lots of clients who are happy, that's going to make a huge difference. Our big challenge here is the HVAC contractor market is super dispersed. So we can reach the contractors, and we do through like large manufacturers. They have preferred contractors, and both of us work with manufacturers, especially Matt. There's lots of education there. I think like getting to the folks that are currently installing furnaces, fossil fuel furnaces, and getting them to take on heat pumps is a much bigger challenge. We're seeing more of that with kind of the next generation, like the kids of the founders of these firms. I will just say that's like an unsolved issue. Lots of states have got training programs, but I think that's like we're kind of trying to come at that from so many angles.
Yeah, so I would cite again, in the U.S. overall and in a majority of states, the most commonly installed HVAC system is an air conditioner. Primarily central ducted air conditioners, but also some ductless ones. So the point is that most of these companies, they'll install a furnace, they'll install a boiler, they'll install an air conditioner. Like very often, these companies will offer the whole range of things. And as I said, there are some tough questions about load and sizing, and you really have to be kind of specific and careful, right, when you switch. In ways that you could kind of paper over if you were just going to put in whatever was there before. But as I said, I mean, it's not that they don't have the training. It's not that they don't know that heat pumps are desirable, because millions of them are installed every year in the U.S. It's just when it comes to new regulations or requirements or major changes that happen quickly, I think that small businesses are right to be worried about how that might impact them in terms of soft costs, in terms of like, their training requirements, if they're the type of business that takes on apprentices, like, all that stuff costs money, and they're operating on a pretty short margin as it is. And it's tough to be a small business owner. That's why private equity is buying up all these little HVAC companies around the country. I think what we need is to expand our policy imagination to include approaches to workforce development that aren't just focused on training, but are focused on, reducing those soft costs and making it worth their while and making sure that they're going to be protected through the transition in the same way we're talking about homeowners. So Russell's point, like we have to join forces with these folks because their concerns are valid, and they care about their customers and their families. And we have to, if we're going to do this in a just and equitable way, then it's going to require that we listen to them and understand what they need in order to make this switch.
To be clear about like we're up against is that in much of the country, I mean, there isn't a strong business motivation to push this, to be a vanguard. The last thing an HVAC contractor wants, like the nightmare, is one of their clients calling in winter saying, that system, that newfangled system you installed for me, isn't working, I'm cold. And they've, for 30, 40, 50 years, they've installed furnaces that they know work, they can size well, they're reliable. And so what's the motivation for them to try something new? And so I think like for many HVAC contractors, maybe they also tried older heat pumps that didn't work as well in cold climates. So I think it's going to be that first heat pump install will be the hard one. And from what I can say from my own personal experience with heat pumps and so many other people is they work great. It's just, but you've got to, you got to get over that hump and, try and have that willing client who's going to try something new. For home contractors like out there, I mean, I think the two big things they need to know, well, first of all, is this is happening. Like this shift to heat pumps is happening. It's happening in policy, the mandates for all electric new construction, the IRA, the commitments, we just heard from this coalition of states, and it's gathering pace. Like 5 years ago, this seemed like kind of a little out there. This is like mainstream for most of the country. And the second thing is we're seeing these shifts in the market. Heat pumps have outpaced furnace sales for every month in the last 2 years. Solar generations up about 40% in the last 20 years. Battery sales are up 70% in the last decade. So there's a big shift happening right now. And I think like to remain competitive, get ahead of what like customers want, this is something for like contractors to really start paying attention to.
Something you, Matt, had brought up is sort of the incentive for the contractor in a sort of a policy sense to install these, and there being sort of a lack of that. And I know you guys, haven't done anything official, but have there been any even casual conversations with legislators that proposed that kind of approach? And if so, what was the response?
I don't know about you. We haven't brought any sort of policy program to legislators on this because I think it's really critical to understand what the pressures the contractors themselves are facing in order for us to put that together. We have had an ongoing dialogue with parts of the contractor community to that end. So Ferguson is the largest distributor of HVAC equipment in the country. They're a BDC member. We hosted an event with them in the New York City area earlier this year, and they've got local law 97, which applies to large buildings and is going to require a lot of retrofit work there in the coming years. And we hosted an event with 50 of New York City's largest commercial contractors to talk about what pressures they're facing. Yeah, and then of course, I mean, there are contractor trade associations that, as an organization that tries to be closely in touch with the industry, we're always talking to and learning from.
I mean, where this is happening is with like incentive programs. So what they call kind of midstream incentive programs, in particular where the programs will run through the contractor, there's typically like an incentive there for the contractors. They will get a payment when one of their clients goes for heat pump. And so it's both to encourage the sales of that and also compensate them for any additional time that's involved. So that is happening. And it's kind of one of the best routes we have right now. Also, as like Matt could, I'm sure, speak to in great detail. I mean, all the major heat pump manufacturers, and again, when we say heat pump, we're talking both like the heat pump for heating and for hot water. There's also heat pumps. Matt gave the example of what heat pumps really swapping, taking the heat from the air. There's ground source heat pumps, but all the manufacturers have training programs specifically for contractors And these are programs that they have offered for years upon years upon years. Often it is a former contractor that's providing those. So it's like super grounded stuff. So there's no shortage of that available.
I know heat pumps is a big battle. I mean, comparing it to Helm's Deep, I think that gives everyone a sense of the magnitude. But even Helm's Deep happened, middle way through the bigger war for Middle Earth, right? Like, which is
Wow.
Like climate change.
You guys are such nerds.
By the way, so we have 3 people talking about heat pumps and Lord of the Rings. We got a huge audience here, let me tell you.
But in the sense of like fighting this bigger war, heat pumps is one battle. Where are some of the other areas that contractors and homeowners can make their homes more sustainable? Where are those other fights happening, and where can they sort of win them?
Let me see. So at BDC, we have a chefluencer program, right? We have a cohort of like social media influencers that are chefs that help us evangelize induction cooking. It's tremendously fast. You can boil a pot of water in like 90 seconds. It's super responsive. It's the choice of an increasing number of professional chefs and private cooks and folks in that line of work. And in the same way that people love heat pumps because the heat is so even and they're so efficient, and there's different products that, regardless of what kind of home you have, this one for you. Induction's like that. That's something that people, in respect to a part of their house that is so close to their fundamental well-being and standard of living, they can see firsthand in a really tangible way, like the actual real benefits of electrification for them. It's a product that just does work better. And IRA, you can get $800. In many states, it's going to be, on par, right, with a baseline, standard electric range or a gas range. Something like that, I think, is a great example.
And the other big areas of fly really in starting with things that are most available to people is, first of all, like weatherization. Like there's weatherization programs around the country for like kind of low income households. Solar is such a different story than it was 15 years ago, when I would have said, oh, that's like the last thing to do. I mean, the costs of that are dramatically down. If you've got like, good credit scores, you can get that thing fully financed and see kind of savings right away. There's lots of companies that love to stick solar on your roof. So that's available for homeowners. And then the third one is like EVs, which is not available. The cost of that puts it aside for many people. But those are the other pieces of decarbonizing homes.